Basically, I want to welcome everybody tonight. Thank you for coming out, especially on a Sunday night when it's cold in the middle of November. It's very hard the weekend after a time change. But this talk is going to be focused on gay men's health and well-being, some of the present, and taking a look at the present-day issues that are affecting gay men. And gay subcultures too. The Polari Project is a Hamilton online collective of gay men. It's run by gay men for gay men. It's a website. It's got videos. It's got social media component. It's got blogs. It's got games. It's got dating apps. It's got all sorts of stuff involved in it. And it's just over a year and a half old now. So this talk, it does have some porn images in it. It is a little explicit. If people have a hard time with gay sex or talking about sexuality, then that's what we're talking about, right? So, and I plan to be quite straight up and blunt. And one of the things I'm going to do first that I think is really important in order to get a grasp of things is to really understand a little bit of queer theory and the issues affecting gay men is really looked at in a lot of academic universities and things now. There's queer studies programs. So this lecture was really difficult for me to put together. Because there is so much content, but I want it to be accessible because we are being videotaped tonight and it is going to go out to a wider audience. I want it to be accessible not just to gay men, but to a straight audience. So in order to do that, I'm going to start at a very basic level, as basic as I can, but normally this would be like a course that somebody would take, and I'm going to try to cram it down into like 45 minutes. So we'll see how well I do, and we're going to have lots of gaps, but I'm going to do my best. So with that to start, I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer too, which is really important, because tonight I'm going to be speaking from my perspective and my experience, and I can't speak for all gay men. Lots of people will disagree with my politics on these issues and my point of view. Again, when I'm talking, it's very important when I talk about these issues that people understand it's my perspective, nobody else's. So let's start with the Kinsey scale. The Kinsey scale was developed in 1948. It's a scale that determines where people fall in terms of their sexuality. You have two extremes. It's very, very basic. On one extreme, in this case, it's a 0, would be a straight heterosexual guy who has no inclinations in sleeping with a guy. On the other end, you have a 6, which is exclusively homosexual. And then you have everything in between, right? Like bisexuals, guys who sort of experiment a little bit, incidentally, whatever. And for myself, I would probably fall around a 5, meaning that I have had sex with women. And I do still occasionally, very, very rarely, will have sex with a woman. But I still identify as a gay man. And there's lots of men who do have sex with men who don't identify as gay men. And out of Kinsley's work from 1948, that's where we get the 10% of the population as being gay. So that's 1948. And since that time, our thinking around sexuality's changed pretty dramatically. And right now, the new ideas, we have the Kinsey scale, which is like the 1 to 6, but now we have new charts that are floating around out there that look at things like class, race, privilege, disability, culture, language. And I think that's very important too, because when I'm talking about being gay, I'm talking about it from my experience in Ontario and as a Canadian. It's very different if I was a gay man in Uganda. The experience of being gay and being sexual would be extremely different. So on top of this, we now have a whole bunch of letters that have been added to the gay alphabet, which is the LGBTQ intersex two-spirited A, right? Like we have LGBTQITSA and questionings in there too. And a lot of conversations in academic circles is around the intersection of privilege, intersection of how these sexualities all merge. So you have a disabled queer who's white and has a Jewish mother, and how does that shape their experience? And the big focus now is on intersectionality and how these groups really overlap. But this has made it somewhat problematic and harder to talk about gay men and exclusively gay men. And it brings in a lot of victim politics too, like who's suffering the most, who's the most oppressed in that circle. And it shuts down a lot of conversations that need to be had by gay men. So with the Polari Project, our focus is gay men. And that's not to exclude other groups or other people. It's just knowing that we can't focus on everyone and meet everyone's needs. And gay men, as I said, aren't a uniform group, but they do have common experiences in a common culture. And that's things like coming out, homophobia, stigma, just everyday sort of things that all gay men sort of share. So this, on top of that, we're living in a very modern day idea that's somewhat corporate generated. It's a modern narrative of what gay men are. And that idea is that gay men are all rich with big disposable incomes. And that's not true. That's not true in my experience. If that was true, we would have so many gay bars, have so many gay restaurants, there'd be so many gay magazines because we have all this disposable money, right? We don't, right? And there's this corporate narrative right now that we all want to get married and have kids and look like this couple in the picture here. I don't know any couples that actually look like that, and I know a lot of gay men, right? There's very few of us that actually look like this Tylenol ad. And that comes into another real paradigm that's being faced with gay men. And that's the idea that there's good gays, okay? So let's talk about the good gays, because I'm not a good gay. And I don't like good gays. I don't like children. And one of the good things about being gay for me is I don't have to have children. That's a really good thing, because I would not make a good dad. But the idea of a good gay, it's a bit of a dichotomy, just like we've heard with women, there's a dichotomy, the mother-whore dichotomy, that all women are either mothers or they're sluts, right? They're sluts, whores, sex, whatever. And the same sort of split goes on with gay men, right? Like right now there's this narrative that we want to get married like straight people, we want to act like straight people, we aren't political, we want to act monogamous, or when you meet us in the office, we tend to be quiet about our sex lives and very respectful as straight people. But the truth is some of that behavior comes out of shame, right? So I think one of the things that all gay men share growing up and being gay is shame. And out of that shame, it creates a schism. There's a group of people who are desperate to be accepted, right? And to get approval. And often that comes, it's a form of oppression where they want to please straight people. And by putting on this image that, oh, we're nice, we're just like you, I'm going to get married. If I were to get married, I get a lot of approval from that from my coworkers in my office. But I don't want to get married. And there is another schism that isn't very healthy for gay men, and that's the other side of the coin, which is the bad gays. So as much as I like sex, and I have a lot of it, the bad gays get viewed from straight people as being partiers, irresponsible, self-indulgent. They act like adolescents. There's another layer put on that bad gays get HIV. They deserve to get HIV. And there's a lot of shame that comes with that too, right? And so there's a certain section of the population that acts out of that shame and internalizes it as being a lack of self-love and acts out, right, in very self-destructive ways. So when we're talking about gay health, it's important to keep that dichotomy in mind. The other dichotomy, or other thing that I think is really interesting, is the way we look at love versus sex. So I can love my car. Nobody's going to have a problem with that. Can love a good book, and I can love bananas. Where the problem comes is if I want to have sex with my car and rub my penis on my car, if I want to have sex with a book and I jerk off with a book, or, of course, if I want to have sex with a banana, you can imagine how kinky that could get. And a lot of people have problems. They don't have problems if I go to work and talk about how much, I love things, how much I love my partner. But as soon as I start talking about having sex with other people or my partner, that becomes an issue. And that's basically based on the fact that we live in a very sex-negative culture. So I'm going to just explore the notion of a sex-negative culture. So one of the things about gay culture are bathhouses. And often when I talk about bathhouses, people really, unless you've been to one, you really don't have an idea of it, right? They sort of hear stories about it, they sort of have some idea in their head. And often when I ask people, what's it like inside a bathhouse, right? They think it's dark, seedy, kind of smelly. It's got to be sad people, because only sad people would ever want to go to a bathhouse. And it's kind of the way we talk about sex work. And often when we talk about women doing sex work, we think that they're forced into it. They wouldn't do sex work as a choice. It must be awful. Who would ever choose to do that? And it's the same with gay life, right? Like, it's something sad. Why would people do that? Why would somebody want to go to a bathhouse? It must be pretty horrific. So let's take a look at inside a bathhouse. This is a bathhouse in Toronto. It's called Steamworks. And this is what it looks like. And to me, if you haven't been in a bathhouse before, and some people here have, this looks kind of like the Starship Enterprise to me. It's bright, it's colorful, it's clean, it's got a nice gym, things are made out of glass. It's actually a really beautiful place. So bathhouses can be extremely modern and extremely whatever. Very, very cool. Now, I'm going to show you another picture of a bathhouse, because one may not prove it to you. This is a bathhouse. This is one of the oldest bathhouses. It's in Vienna. It dates back to the Roman days. And again, it's really luxurious, well-lit, very clean, really great places. And bathhouses are really positive spaces. And I think for gay men, if they have sacred spaces that are like churches that they can operate in and feel safe in, it's a bathhouse, right? Like, if you come into a bathhouse, you're playing by gay men's rules, right? And it's one spaces that we have that we really have control over, and they're great. They're like temples of sexual experimentation. So what I think is important in dealing with gay men's health, or talking to gay men about their health needs, is to suspend judgment, right? So we have to get rid of all those sex-negative ideas, and we have to suspend our judgment. So with that little disclaimer and that little background, we're going to jump into talking about queer subculture and taking a look at a bit of history stuff, right? So what it's important to understand with any culture, whether it be modern American culture, whatever culture, where its roots are and where it came from. I'm going to skip over all homosexuality in different cultures and a lot of things, and I'm going to start in the 1950s, because gay men who are in their 70s were alive in 1950, and I think that has impacted and influences the culture that we live in today. So I'm really talking about the more recent history of homosexuality here. We're going to talk about Polari, because that actually comes out of the 1950s. So Polari was a language that was used in England in the 1950s and 60s. And it was a secret gay language. It was a slang language. In those days, it was used by gay men, sex workers, and criminals. And it was used as a form of protection and secrecy. Outsiders would not be able to understand what they were talking about when people spoke Polari. And it also had a humorous and campy element to it. So even though it was a secret sort of code, it still had a fun sensibility to it. And it still had a sex positivity to it as well. And Polari had over 500 different words. It had a huge vocabulary. And I think I'm just going to play a little bit of it now, so you can actually hear some Polari.
Didn't. Pauline's a stretcher case. Trolled in one notch, he devoured a Phyllis plate and some shin bars she blagged in the brandy latch.
Dish the dirt.
It's all over grumble for Pauline. Nanti Denali up to her elbow in the national handbag. She'd only just gone in for a remould. Had to refake her entire basket.
Speaking of baskets.
Oh, Gloria. That stretcher corribungus.
Fortuny.
Mind you, it's the dolly ones that disappoint. I was seeing this HP from Sheffield once. Plates the size of bowling pins, thought it was in for a right boner chalvering.
Nada Tavada in the larder.
Oh, bijou. You needn't put the brandy on for that, I said when I saw it. Mind you, she was heavy on the lech water. Had to use the Daz to get a Maria out my libbage.
Oh, vile. She's always been that way then, Phyllis.
She's a walking meat rack. Fantabulo's a bit of hard. We used to act dicky together at the Crocus Chovy. Noshed me off once while I was giving a fungus his drabs.
That's skill, that.
Okay, so I don't know how much of that people understood, but I think we get a gist. It was some sex talk in there, something going on, right? So what's interesting about Polari as a language is it dates back over 900 years, right? So this language used by gay men, used by sex workers, used by criminals, has been going on for a very long time, and it's actually still used today, right? So there's words that I'll use when I'm with my gay friends, little slang terms, little things that are in code, right? And we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. I'm going to show you some examples of that. But even though watching that film, it looks like it's antiquated, isn't it cute that gay men had to talk like that, gay men still have to talk in code and still have a secret language. And the reason that secret language exists is because we haven't actually accepted the realities of gay men. So we're going to, again, take a look at the history here and what's going on in the past to understand the present. So in the 1950s, there was a lot of heavy pressure around pathology, right? Gay men were seen as sick, they were seen as mentally ill, they were seen as something that needed to be cured. And it was often viewed through a medical lens, and people were shamed and grew up thinking there was something ill with them, that it was a fault that lied within themselves, a deficiency, something the mother did, something whatever. All these crazy-ass theories came out that made it very, very difficult for gay men to accept themselves, but it was also our bodies and our minds and our behaviors were put under intense scrutiny. And if we jump ahead, we're going to jump ahead to the 1960s and 70s, where a lot of things started to happen, right? So it was this was sort of the coming out period. We had gay liberation, we had the women's movement, we had all these progressive things coming forward. And a lot of terminologies like it's good to be gay, a day without lesbians is like a day without sunshine. I think that's a great one. A lot of sex positivity came out of that, and things started to open up, right? Like you started to have bathhouses. That's when more and more bathhouses started to open up. It's when more and more bars started to open up. And in a lot of ways, it was a golden age for the gay community, and it was you know, a lot of movement in civil rights for gay men and lesbians started to take place, as well as the opening up of possibilities for open relationships, intergenerational relationships. There was a lot of literature produced and a huge amount of dialogue that doesn't really exist in the same way that it did back then. And then, of course, something bad happens, right? We hit the AIDS crisis. And when the AIDS crisis hit, it was like a Holocaust. People didn't know why they were getting sick. It decimated gay men. It took out a whole generation of gay men died. And with that, sex came from something that was free and liberating to be associated with death, right? So suddenly you went from this great, sexuality is great, sexuality is wonderful, go out and fuck, screw whoever you want, have a good time fucking, to you do that and you die. You're gonna be punished, you're gonna get sick. You were already a sick person, as we know from the 1950s, you know, and this is what you get, right? And that really, it's interesting because it was a Holocaust, and you know, I'm 47 years old, and when I look at the generation of gay men who I went to high school with, and my gay teachers in high school, I went to an arts high school, so I was very, very lucky and privileged that way. A lot of them now are HIV positive or dead, right? So when this hit, it took out an entire group of people. And I assure you, if those men were alive, we'd be in a very different world. And I don't think we'd have Donald Trump. At least no, I really don't think we'd have Donald Trump. And some of the coolest, most interesting men I know died. But what came, if anything positive came out of the AIDS crisis, was activism. And people were forced out of the closet. And people were forced to put their rights forward. You can't hide it when you're sick and dying, right? People could not be in a closet anymore because they were sick. And that forced society to sort of recognize that gay men were there. We had to start talking about sex. We had to talk about condoms. We had to talk about all sorts of things. And it sort of brought that whole stuff, a whole other dimension to things out to the surface. And I think, if anything, it did propel things forward. But with that, in the 90s, we did start developing some drug treatments. And those drug treatments weren't very good. But they had to happen. There was no other choice. People were faced with death or taking these horrible pill regimens, which created a load of side effects. And out of that came a whole bunch of new shame around being sick, about having HIV. People are still scared of HIV today. But even gay men were still terrified just of getting it because they'd see these guys with these horrible side effects. And, you know, people talk to me and say, oh, you know, gay men are so body obsessed and so fascist and obsessed with looking perfect. A lot of that, I mean, comes from that history of if you're too skinny, you must be sick. There's something wrong with you if you, you know, gay men really wanted to rebel against that notion and that pressure of being recognized as being gay because they were all assumed to have AIDS. If you were gay, you were thought automatically that you could have it. or were going to get it. And so straight people were very afraid. And I think that put a lot of pressure on gay men's culture and to have beautiful, perfect, healthy, muscle-bound bodies that did not look sick. We're going to talk about some present-day issues now, knowing that history. Because I do think the scrutiny that gay men's bodies are under and those issues still impact, and we carry a legacy of all that stuff today and how that's playing out in gay men's health. So one of the things, there's some really key issues right now. And one of the big issues that's, very central, Center 3, Taya and myself did a project around it, is HIV criminalization. And HIV criminalization basically forces people with HIV into the closet. And it stops, you think, well, why don't I hear about AIDS anymore? Why don't I meet people with HIV? Why don't people with HIV speak out? Why don't people out themselves as being HIV the way they would diabetes or cancer? Well, the truth is they can't, because now they're facing being locked up in jail and going to jail. Because the laws are, if you don't disclose your HIV status with a sexual partner, even if you're using condoms, even if you're practicing safe sex, you can go to jail. And in Hamilton in 2009, we set a precedent case here where the first person ever in Canada was charged with 2 counts of murder and 10 counts of aggravated assault. And he's in jail indefinitely. That means he's not coming out. And since that time, we put tons and tons of people away. Well, I shouldn't say tons and tons, but several thousand people in Canada away and are facing charges for being HIV positive. And this is not good public health strategy or policy. We need to have encourage people with HIV to come out, to talk about things, to not live in fear. There's been cases where people have been blackmailed with HIV. People saying, oh, I'll tell the cops that I had unsafe sex with you, and you'll go to jail, so you better pay me $20,000, right? So it's not a good thing. But it's not all gloom and doom. I'm going to talk about PrEP. And I don't know how many people know about PrEP. As a gay man, it's all gay men are talking about. And it's I'm always shocked when I go in a room and straight people don't know about PrEP. Well, I'm going to tell you about PrEP. PrEP is a 1-a-day pill that stops HIV. It's as effective as a condom. In places, Canada is really behind on this. In February, Health Canada just legalized it. The World Health Organization recommends all sexually active gay men be on it. In places like America, as backward as America is right now, and hopefully this will still stay the same, it's free to gay men in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, because they realize how effective PrEP is. It's a 1-a-day pill, you just take it every day. If you take that, it lowers HIV and the risk of transmission of HIV, and it's a preventative and it's effective. So everybody should go on that because it's a great drug. It's so effective that if I was on PrEP and taking PrEP, I could take a needle of HIV positive blood and inject it in my arm. That's how effective it is. We know PrEP's out there. Why isn't the media covering it? Why aren't people taking it? Like, what's going on, right? Like, what is really happening here? Well, you remember when I started the talk, I was talking about the good gays and the bad gays. So we're going to talk about, there's terms that exist, again, Polari terms. And one of the terms that's being thrown out there for people who are on PrEP is Truvada whores, right? So there's this whole notion that if gay men, bad gays, are going out there and they're taking this stuff and they may not be getting HIV, but they're going to get gonorrhea, they're going to get all these other diseases, and they're just going to turn into sex maniacs, and they're just going to be fucking like crazy, and we're looking at, it's going to go out of control, right? And these are very, very old ideas and very, very old notions about empowering people with their health care, right? And we saw that happen with AIDS. Oh, if you put condom machines in schools, kids are gonna start fucking like crazy, those 14-year-olds. Well, regardless, those 14-year-olds are fucking, and regardless, gay men are fucking too, so why not empower them with the tools to keep themselves safe? And this, actually, we have seen with the birth control pill. So in the 1960s, the similar thing happened with women. The exact same thing, that if you give a woman control over her body to make her own choices, she'll get right out there, she'll be fucking like crazy, they'll all turn into whores. That didn't happen. I don't think that's happened with the birth control pill. What I think's happened with the birth control pill is we don't see as many unwanted pregnancies, and we don't have as many abortions. Gay men have the right not to get HIV, and anything we can do to help them to do this, we should be doing. And that's talking about PrEP. The other thing that's really important to understand, too, is where we are with the HIV crisis. HIV is no longer a death sentence. Somebody who's diagnosed today can live as long as somebody who's HIV negative. The treatment for somebody with HIV today is 1 pill a day with 0 side effects. It doesn't harm their bodies. They don't get lipodystrophy. They don't get any side effects. And we're very lucky to have that technology, but that technology came out of those guys that we were looking at, those pictures in disfigurement, and all the deaths that happened in the 1980s and 90s, right? So even though HIV is great, we have to remember where that technology came from and what a horrible cost it was to those men who died from just taking the drug regimens that they had to. But now, HIV, you can take a pill for it. You can be undetectable. That means you have no viral, your viral load cannot be detected on a blood test. And we've really evolved with how HIV is. HIV is even easier to deal with than diabetes. Given the choice, I would rather have HIV than diabetes, for sure. Your health options are just a lot better. With all this stuff, they've done studies now, and one of the studies is the Partners study. This is a really big study, and it involved thousands of couples, and it was a mixed study. That means one partner was HIV positive, the other partner was negative, and they followed them over a period of 6 years. Out of all the unsafe sex that happened between those couples, there were 0 infections, right? So as long as somebody is taking their HIV medication, you can have sex with them, and as long as they're taking their HIV medication and are undetectable, it's very important that I get that right, you can have sex with them and not contract HIV, according to this Partners study. And that's huge. And that means that huge stigma amongst gay men, because there is a stigma. You have these good gay men and these bad gay men, and bad gay men have HIV. It means we don't need to operate that way anymore. And it's so important that people understand where HIV is now, as opposed to how it was just 10 years ago. And because of this stuff, the World Health Organization says if everybody were to take medications, if gay men go on PrEP, and intravenous drug users started using PrEP, we could see the end of incidences of HIV by 2030. At least that was before Tuesday. I don't know if that's going to happen under Donald Trump, because talking about cutting funding to organizations like that. But we could see an end to HIV infections. It could be something that hardly anybody ever gets, right? Like that's doable. And it's all because of these technologies. And there's better technologies that are coming. They're working on a vaccine. Obviously, they've been working on a vaccine for a long time, but it's getting closer and closer and easier. So there is a health crisis, though, that is killing a lot of gay men. That affects 1 in 4 gay men have used or are using crystal meth. And chemical drugs have entered more and more extreme into gay men's sexuality. Gay men have a higher rate of addiction, for sure, because of all the social and pressures put upon them. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was pot and alcohol and LSD, but now we're talking about crystal meth and GBH, which have huge impacts. And there's not a lot of support systems. If you think 1 in 4 gay men are dealing with meth addictions, and they estimate that 1 in 4 gay men have HIV, you don't see the same response to crystal meth addiction within the gay community as you do towards HIV. I'm going to play a little clip from in England. They're a little more ahead on this stuff because it's, I travel a lot. I'm British, and I've been over to England lots of times, and I was over in Israel and Palestine this year, and I've been in the States. And it doesn't matter wherever I go, there's a real culture of crystal meth use and what we call P&P. I don't know how many of you know what P&P is, but that means partying and playing. It's pretty normalized amongst a certain subset of gay men, for sure. And it's a problem, right? And it's international, I'd say, in all urban centers. If I wanted to use crystal meth, I could do it very, very quickly, very, very fast. I could find it quick in Hamilton. I could find it quick in Montreal. I could find it in Toronto, Vancouver, in just a couple of seconds. And a big reason for that is because of phone apps, right? So one thing that's come along recently are new innovations in technology, like smartphones. And that's allowed gay men to hook up quicker and faster than ever before. These apps are a way for people to meet for sex, parties, drugs, whatever they want to do. We break that down even further, and there's different apps for different types of men that you're interested in. So if you want a daddy, there's a Daddy Hunt app. If you're into scruffy guys, there's an app called Scruff. Growler for bears, which are large-bellied, hairier guys. There's all sorts of apps. But there's problems with these apps. And one of the biggest problems with these apps is they became the major way that gay men communicate with each other. And they're commercially driven as opposed to community-based, right? And there's limitations in what you can do on these apps. And they're basically about setting up a profile. You've got limited tags that you can use. And it's, again, locks down our sexuality. And it's not always the best way to communicate health messages or for gay men to just have conversations with each other. Because of these apps, there's a bit of an opposite thing is happening, right? Like we're seeing gay sexuality move even more into a subculture, into a public sphere. Because used to, if I had to get pornography, instead of looking for it online, I would walk in a store and buy it, right? But now everything is online. And with that, again, pornography is, porn is basically how gay men learn about themselves. If you're a gay kid, most likely it's your first contact with what it means to be gay. And statistics have shown that 65% of kids under the age of 11 have seen porn. And that's not really the best way to learn about sexuality, about relationships, about how to communicate with other men. Porn is an artificial construct. It takes a lot of time to make a porn. Even though it looks like a 2-minute clip, it actually takes about 3 hours to manufacture that 2-minute clip. There's a lot involved in that, and it's being deeply imprinted onto people's brains, and things were unheard of in the 1970s are now commonplace and the norm. So you've got a lot of pressure on gay adolescents, and I've just scratched the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that's happened is bars have closed. When I first moved to Hamilton 15 years ago, we had a gay bookstore, we had 5 gay bars, there were 2 gay bathhouses in Hamilton. Right now, all the gay bars are closed. We have 1 bathhouse, I think we have 2 bathhouses. One of them is only open during the summer. And there's not a lot happening. This used to be a gay bar that we're in. It had been a gay bar since 1969. So 3 years ago, this building got purchased and it got changed into the Spice Factory. But it used to be a gay bar and it was multiple floors. There would be drag shows and things happened every night, and there was a sex room in the basement. And that's all gone. And on top of that, you know, even straight sexual spaces are disappearing too. So the Hamilton Strip is the last strip bar in Hamilton, and I've heard that it's going to be torn down and turned into a condo. So we're erasing the ways that we connect sexually, and we're creating this only place that you're going to see sexuality or relate to other people is through mediated technologies. With that, if you're confused by everything that I've just said, imagine how gay men are, and imagine how young gay men, how confused they are to step out into this world. So when we talk about gay men being privileged and having all this great opportunities and how all the disposable income we have, I really think we have to challenge that a lot, because that is a myth, and it's a corporately constructed myth. And it's actually, I think in a lot of ways, just as tough to be a gay man now as it was in the 1950s. There's just huge, huge pressures. Even though we're not getting beat up, even though we're not getting arrested the way we would in the past, and even though there's more of us out, these issues are so undiscussable, and there's so few places where, as gay men, we can actually talk to each other. Okay, so that's one of the reasons we started the Polari Project. And so I just quickly put together a list of some words that would be considered modern-day Polari. That some of them you can sort of figure out, and some of them you won't. Some gay men will know more of these words than others. But basically, if I were to have a conversation with a gay guy and he started texting me this stuff, I'd know exactly what a rosebud is. I know definitely what a bulldog is. I know what a gift giver is. A twunk, I know what that is. You know, there's just terms as gay men that we use that I don't think straight people will get, right? But it's the way that we communicate. And so the purpose of the Polari Project was to create an online hub and an online source of resources for gay men that talks about these issues in their own terms and in their own way. And we do it through a number of different ways. So we have a number of different campaigns that, again, this is all targeted to gay men. It's not targeted to straight men or to heterosexuals. And I think that's really important because we're speaking in a language that gay men understand to other gay men. So, and we use sexually explicit images that come from porn because that's the language that gay men learn about themselves. And even though porn images can be problematic, it's the language that we all speak, right? So we do have a number of online campaigns that look at HIV criminalization, that look at how to drug use, how to do that safer. Definitely concentrating heavily on PrEP. The AIDS Network won't even touch PrEP because they're too afraid to. They're afraid of insurance issues and liability issues. As gay men, we feel that's very, very important that we tackle these issues and talk about them. Because the more men we get on PrEP, the safer they are, the more fun we can have. And we're very pro-sex. We take a very pro-sex attitude, that sex is good, healthy, and fun.